good afternoon, good evening. Whenever you're joining us, welcome. This is the Appreciative Recovery Show. We believe that curiosity, self-compassion, and connection are foundational values that, if cultivated as a daily practice, make any path toward wellness filled with wonder and joy. My name is Kelly Knox. I am the host of this show. And today our guest is Reverend Janet Parsons of the Gloucester Unitarian Universalist Church. Reverend Janet was called to the Gloucester UU Church in 2015. Before entering the ministry, she was an affordable housing specialist and also worked as a church staff person for years. Janet was active in hurricane relief efforts in the wake of Hurricane Katrina and led our participation in 10 relief trips to New Orleans and Louisiana. She loves her adult sons and their partners, as well as living in Cape Ann, gardening, reading, and dogs. So welcome, Reverend Janet.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm grateful that you could join us today.
Yes, it's fun. This is exciting.
Yeah. So we're going to discuss what's called beloved community, right?
Okay.
So I'm going to throw out a definition as explained by the King Center, which is the memorial institution that was founded by Coretta Scott King to further the goals of Dr. Martin Luther King. So this is how they explain it. Beloved community is a global vision in which all people can share in the wealth of the earth. In the beloved community, poverty, hunger, and homelessness will not be tolerated because international standards of human decency will not allow it. Racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, and prejudice will be replaced by an all-inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood. Actually gives me the chills. So it's kind of a relevant and worthy topic at the moment. So what are your first thoughts when you think of that definition?
I actually think that it could be expanded.
Yeah.
It's a worthy goal. It's as I say about so much of our foundational beliefs, they're aspirational. There's something to be lived into, and it's not something that we achieve today in this moment, but it's a goal to work towards. But when I think of beloved community, their definition to me is very secular, and I see it, from a more religious perspective as, I guess one way to put it is, how do we create heaven on earth? How do we create what some people would call the kingdom or the realm? And it's a way of thinking and a way of being. And it's also not just for us today in this moment, but it's moving into the future. It transcends time, so it goes across time. It's what we often call the cloud of witnesses behind us, as well as the people into the future as well, are all part of this beloved community from my perspective.
Yeah, that's I love that cloud of witnesses.
I do
heard
too.
that statement before. Yeah, so it's a matter of kind of setting the foundation and moving forward, and not expecting to reach that lofty goal,
right?
But leaving maybe the world a little bit better for those behind us.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It talks about ending poverty and homelessness, which those are kind of objectives, but is a more global thing of how do we make sure that everybody gets what they need, regardless of what they need. And I also thought that in the context of the climate crisis right now, that this is a very important way of being and of thinking about the whole world and the people who are going to be terribly affected by the climate crisis. Talking about food shortages and dislocation, people not being able to live where they live now. So we'll be tested severely to try to attain the beloved community going forward.
Yeah, I see that
Yeah.
unfolding. I mean, we're kind of
Yeah.
tested right now, just in the circumstances of the world,
Yes.
with the climate change situation and other world situations and the political situation. How do we as a community address that in a way that does it the way that you laid it out, that we create a foundation? And what is that foundation? Is the foundation relational? Is the foundation of the way we think? What?
It's a great question, and it's a really complicated question. For me, it is really teaching ourselves to see everyone's humanity. And so often we get invited to be divisive and to not look at each other as some cultures say, to look at each other with soft eyes, which is to look at each other with compassion and empathy. And so I think that it starts there. It's training ourselves to look at people with less judgment and to see them as human beings who have their own struggles, and as every human does, and to transcend that sense of I'm different than you, my skin color is different, I speak a different language, and so to not let ourselves be divided by fear and hatred. So it starts with that, and then I think that the other really foundational piece is putting relationship first. Mm-hmm. That everything that we do stems from relationships. Without relationships, without the desire to be in relationship, we lose a big piece of our humanity. Our human nature really calls us to be in relationship with each other.
Mm-hmm. So. And that's not always easy.
No, not at all. No.
Showing up.
Yes.
is the first step, I suppose.
Showing up, listening, training ourselves to react with compassion and empathy first is what I try to do. And as I said, this is always aspirational. Right. Sometimes we can do it, sometimes we can't. Right. But it starts there. That is the basis for treating each other well, listening to each other. And then if we can start consistently doing that, then if we can see people as human, regardless of addictions or homelessness or poverty or language differences, whatever, then that becomes less of an issue. It becomes less important, and we can work on the problems, the structural problems together.
So as a Unitarian Universalist minister, what elements of society, what elements of a particular community, like, I guess let's start with this. How would you define community? First you have the church community, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then because that's your vocation, right? That's the word I'm looking for. So that's your vocation. And from out, how does it build out like that? Like, how does that ripple into the larger community? Is that how things change?
Well, that's kind of two different questions, I think.
I guess.
But,
okay.
How do you build community? I think we do it naturally. We seek out people who have similar interests and similar desires. I mean, you think about a community such as Gloucester, there's the geographical community, and within that you have a homeless population. You have people who are grappling with, say, different physical problems. You've got people who are in grief groups because they've just lost a loved one. You have church communities. You have school communities, political communities. Political parties have their own. And so there are all these kind of overlapping communities. And I think that, so we naturally find our like-minded folks. The question is, how then do we expand beyond that to reach out to the people who might not be? Like, how are the cancer survivors talking to the young parents, et cetera? So Neighborhoods can be a huge asset in that regard. But it has to be, I think that it has to be intentional. It hasn't been like, okay, I found my folks and we're going to live in a gated community and we're not going to talk to anybody else. But it's again, it's a way of being. It's a way of saying, those are my people, even though it doesn't necessarily look as though we have anything in common on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure that really answers the question.
No, I think it does. But you did pull it together better than I did, because that's what I was asking. We have all these different communities within this larger community.
Right.
And then this larger community is a community within a larger community,
Yes.
right? So it just keeps rippling out.
Right.
And so the foundational values that you spoke of earlier, I suppose they're not everybody's values. But how, like, speak to, speak to how you would connect those a little bit.
Sometimes
more.
it's, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I guess shared endeavor, finding things that that are larger than the small groups that can pull people together. Thinking again about climate change and how there are people here in town who are working to draw people together, and they're meeting every Thursday, to try to start planning climate justice activities and responses, and they're trying to draw from a really broad cross section of the community. So that's one example.
Well, you just made me think, like, so here's this thing, climate change, that most everybody can get around, because get their arms around.
Right.
And so you might have someone of one political persuasion and someone of another political persuasion at this meeting.
Right. Yes.
Yes. I hear what you're saying.
Or different religious traditions as well. It can be something that everybody can agree on and come to the table and work together about. And then you find out that the other differences are just not as important, at least in that setting.
Right.
And you develop relationships.
Right.
Yeah.
And you show up with the openness of the empathy. And,
exactly.
Yeah. And you start building connections.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. Very good. That makes a lot of sense to me. So we talked a little bit about this. One of the questions I have down here, but the beloved community is I use the word pipe dream. Like, is it ever really attainable? And can you even picture a world without homelessness, without poverty? I mean, does it even exist?
Not presently, and that's why I say this exists across time.
Yeah.
And there might be times when there's less of these human ills, and times when there are more. But ultimately, it is that is our work, always. And it might have a different focus in one era versus another. But I don't know that we ever get there, and I don't know that we would ever be done. And we're just kind of handing it off to the next people who come along behind us, and they move forward into the future. So it would be nice to say, yes, we're going to solve all these problems. I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so.
And they'll evolve, and they will. What our ancestors were grappling with 100 or 200 years ago, oftentimes is not what we're grappling with. We don't have people dying of common illnesses, but we have people dying of other things, and that they didn't confront. And so life evolves, and it's our response to it that matters.
Let's go back to the people who disagree, who have, deep and vastly different values. Do you see a way for people to come together and communicate in a way that is helpful and that pulls into the beloved community concept?
It's hard to pinpoint things that could universally everyone could agree on.
Yeah.
I think we just see the world in very different ways. People do, and I don't know that we should be working toward consensus, but we should be more focused on working toward relationships.
Yeah,
And
it's going to go right back to the relationship
it's just going
piece,
to go
right?
right back to the
Learning
relationship
how
piece.
to
Yeah.
engage in a civil manner with people of different values
Right.
and thought processes.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, we're going to, just because this just happened, and although this will be filming a couple weeks after
Okay.
this today, let's talk a little bit about the mass shootings.
Okay.
All right, so in Ohio and Texas, we just recently, I believe it was just this weekend, I think the count is 32 people?
I think so. And I also add in the Gilroy shooting that happened the week before that.
Right.
And then, but it's also, it happens so frequently that it's kind of hard to know where to cut off and say, we're only going to talk about this piece, because it happens over and over and over again.
Yeah.
We only hear about the big ones.
Right, and I heard, I think it was probably an NPR report about other loss of life through gunfire, like in different states.
Yeah.
Just this last weekend.
Right.
You know, it's just that they were like 2 or 3 people, because a mass shooting is considered 4 or more.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about the mindset of these, and they've all been men, of these men who are perpetrating like these acts. What, if anything, like what are your thoughts on how to address those mindsets? And I don't like to, maybe they have mental illness, but I think it's more of a hate-driven thing, and hate is not mental illness. They're 2 different things.
Right, I agree. And in our religious tradition, the Unitarian Universalist religious tradition, we turn toward love. And I think that Dr. King also strongly stated this as well, that love is an incredibly strong force in the world, and that love is stronger than hate. And in other traditions, they'll say love is stronger than death. And so one commonly heard phrase is that they say hate cannot cure hatred, only love can cure hatred, right? So from my perspective, I think that we just have to try to stay in a place where we focus on loving one another, and not romantically, but in terms of appreciating one another, having compassion for one another. When I talk about loving one another, that's what I mean. It's valuing people's humanity, wanting them to live their best possible life. And that to me is love. And that is stronger than hate, because ultimately hate is driven by fear. And so what you're seeing, I think, in a lot of these incidents is people who are reacting out of fear, and their fear turns into hatred, and it manifests as hatred. And so how do you respond in a way that teaches love and teaches people to not be so afraid of each other? And to just try to consistently have this message of, we are all human, we are all here on this little blue planet, and we will do so much better if we can just find each other's humanity and create relationships.
Yeah. You're making me think forgiveness.
Forgiveness is a piece of it. That to me is, forgiveness is extremely important, but that's kind of a response as opposed to a way of being. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does, actually. I like that a lot.
Okay.
It's true, I think.
Forgiveness is also a way of living your life. But I think that it's more important to cultivate the sense of compassion and empathy first. And then I think forgiveness can come more easily from that. But there's a lot to forgive right now.
There is a lot to forgive.
And my heart goes out to the survivors and the families of all these victims, to think, I don't know how they get to a place of forgiveness. It would be incredible. It would be lifelong work for many people.
I would imagine. I would imagine us here in Gloucester who haven't experienced that.
Exactly. Yeah.
We can pontificate all we want.
Exactly.
We don't know.
Yes, we don't know. We don't know. And so my hope is that people could get there, but it would be very, very difficult and take a long time, a lot of work to do that work, to get to forgiveness.
Yeah. How do you feel about, I guess, maybe you might call it prayer. I call it putting energy out into positive energy that might float down to Texas or over to Ohio.
Right. Prayer is an interesting word, and sometimes it is a sense of just, making your wishes and intentions known. Sometimes, though, it's listening.
Yeah.
There's sometimes prayer is just going still and letting yourself see who might be speaking to you and what you might be hearing, and what you might act on in response. Sometimes, I think it was the mystic Meister Eckhart who said that sometimes the most powerful prayer is thank you. Sometimes it's help. I think the author Anne Lamott wrote a book about prayer, and the title is Help, Thanks, Wow.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, because it's gratitude, it's asking for support and assistance, and it's praise.
Yeah.
Saying, look what we have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Help, thanks, wow.
Help, thanks, wow. I think that actually might be a beautiful way to wrap this whole thing up. Help, thanks, wow. Do you have anything else that you would like to say that you didn't get a chance to say that I didn't ask about beloved community?
Just that I think we should never stop trying. We should never give up. Sometimes it feels beyond our reach, but so many things in our human lives feel way beyond our reach. But that's no excuse to stop trying.
Right.
To be, to work on ourselves first and foremost, to be able to contribute to it. And we do what we can, and the more people who then do what they can, the closer we'll get.
Well put. I want to thank you again so much.
You're very welcome.
For joining us.
You're so welcome.
I want to thank you for watching the show, and we both hope you will continue this similar conversation with your family, friends, community. And if you want to learn more about the Gloucester Unitarian Universalist Church, you can find more information at www.gloucesteruu.org, or you can come join the service 10 a.m. on Sundays at 10 Church Street. And if you want to learn more about Appreciative Recovery, you can find us at www.appreciativerecovery.org. Thank you.